At issue tonight, responding to Trump's threats after the president threatened to take over Canada by economic force.
They should be a state. That's why I told Trudeau when he came down.
The Prime Minister made his case directly to Americans.
Anything an American president does to hurt the Canadian economy will also hurt American consumers.
And Pierre Poilievre laid out his response.
We will state clearly that Canada is a sovereign and independent country.
What can we make of how party leaders are responding to these threats from Donald Trump, and is concern growing given the nature of those comments? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see everyone for the second time this week. I'm going to start with you, Andrew, on this. I wonder how you think Canada is managing so far in its response to these comments that seem to have escalated or intensified.
Well, it's difficult to say. It's so flummoxing, it's so off the charts, it's so, for want of a better word, insane, that it's really it's not easy to see how you respond to that or who you're responding to. It's one thing, the conventional wisdom would say, oh, look, emphasize to American consumers the cost of this. You saw the Prime Minister doing that. Find allies at the state level, in Congress, et cetera. All those usual remedies presume some rationality in the White House. They presume that there's a president there who's actually responsive to a public opinion on this, or conventional wisdom on this. It presumes that public opinion will follow the usual courses. And the state is in a very strange place right now. The president-elect Trump has had, I would say, a disastrous few weeks and months with some of the craziest cabinet appointments since Caligula. And he's gone up in the polls. He's in the positive approval, net approval rating for the first time in his career. So things are not going according to the usual thing. And that also applies to how you deal with Trump. People are always talking about this as if there's some kind of grand negotiating strategy going on here, that he's some kind of master negotiator. And he's not. He's a terrible negotiator. He was a terrible businessman. He was a terrible negotiator as a president. He gave Kim Jong-un, the president of North Korea, a one-on-one with the President of the United States. This is a country with the GDP of Regina. Gave it all the credibility and prestige and got nothing in return. His negotiating strategy with Putin is basically to give him half of Ukraine. So there's no great strategy. He just likes to break things. He likes to blow things up. And that presents a real difficulty for anybody trying to negotiate on our side as to how to figure out what makes him tick and what can possibly dissuade him from this crazy course it's on, whether it is literally about trying to annex Canada or not. It's clearly not based on any kind of usual rational discourse.
And yet there are things being done, right? There was the Prime Minister for the first time on CNN talking to Americans. There's this retaliatory tariff list that they've drawn up. They're going to meet with the premiers, Chantal, because they have to do something in spite of the fact that this is, unlike anything we've seen before.
Yes, and there was also Premier Ford going on Fox News, which I believe is useful to this case. But bottom line, Andrew is right. This isn't in the first Trump. For people who are confused, because this is the second time around, in the first Trump administration, there were a lot of adults in the room that Canada could deal with, that could influence the president. This is not at all. All those adults, by the way, suggested to Americans that they should not vote for Donald Trump. So many of the relationships that were built have disappeared for lack of someone to speak to. But what strikes me is that there are so few ways to deal with this that for the first time in 2 years, 3 years, Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau are on the same basic page on most of this. They're pushing back in the same way. I believe that the CNN interview that Justin Trudeau gave would not have been different if we'd sent someone else, his successor or Pierre Poilievre, to do the interview. And you did hear this week Donald Trump's response to Pierre Poilievre saying, we're not going to be the 51st state. What was the response? I don't care what this guy is saying. So the illusion that we will change Prime Minister and it's going to change everything, forget that. We are not in that environment at all.
Pierre Poilievre says he'll talk tough, but you're right. The strategy in terms of talking to businesses and regular Americans is almost the same. Althea, what did you make of it?
Well, I just want to say, I think the interview on CNN would have been different with Pierre Poilievre because he wouldn't have been talking about carbon pricing or $10 a day childcare. But I get the general point. I do think that part of the challenge is that the Canadian leaders are treating this in the same way that they treated the threat in the first mandate from Donald Trump, the list of tariffs. Like, we are assuming, to Andrew's point, that there are rational actors who will think rationally when the debate is framed in a completely irrational manner. But one thing the Prime Minister said on CNN that I thought was interesting was that Donald Trump is talking about the 51st state so that he's not talking about the impacts of tariffs.
Yeah.
What I thought was a missed opportunity is that on the one hand, you can't have the president say, we don't need Canada for anything. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their steel. We don't need their aluminum. And then not also say what he's actually after, which is actually you do need their energy. You actually do need the rare earth minerals because otherwise you'll be getting them from China. And so that argument hasn't really kicked up a notch. I do think that this is an interesting and valuable opportunity for the Prime Minister and the Liberals because they have been given a chance, and the Prime Minister has been given a chance to reframe the last few weeks of his mandate. That does mean that he needs to actually do the job, and the premiers and people on the calls, anybody you'll ask will complain that the Liberals, the federal government, has been missing in action. But if they do step up, nothing will bring the country together more than this nationalism, we have a common enemy now, its name is Donald Trump. So this is a remarkable opportunity that the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party have been given. Whether or not we're going to use it, I don't know.
Yeah, except that, and we're going to talk about this in the next block, it's happening at a time of a leadership race where other Liberals will be saying, well, I'm going to do this and I would do this differently. So, it's just the timing of all of it just makes it so much more complicated to deal with Donald Trump, even if we had some perfect strategy, Andrew.
Well, that's right. Now, two things worth saying about that. One is I do think it was interesting to notice how quickly a lot of figures on the right, including even Maxime Bernier, in his own particular way, moved to distance themselves from Donald Trump after that press conference. That clearly something broke when in Canadian politics after that thing. People really woke up, and I think it was very clear that if you were on the right side of the spectrum, you want to make sure you were not associated with that. And obviously the Liberals would be trying to tie them to it. So Trump had a target put on him after that in Canadian politics. But secondly, if there's not much we can do to dissuade Trump from his course, we were going to do something on immigration or on controlling fentanyl. Whatever you do on that, it's not going to move him off the tariffs. He's going to put the tariffs on. So we've got to be focusing more on adapting to the new reality of that this is who he is, this is what he does. That's going to require a lot of difficult measures to be done in Canada, which means we've got to have consensus, we've got to have leadership, we've got to have followership, we've got to have people willing to go where the political leaders are taking them. That's very hard to do when you've got a government that's as unpopular as this one, you've got a prime minister that's on his last legs, to summon that kind of national will. And that feeds into our negotiating strategy ultimately, which is, whatever measures we do, they have to be credible to the opposing side. They have to believe we'll actually do the things and we can sustain the political support to do them. So we're in a very weak position unless we have an election and clear the air about, who governs Canada and who has the popular support.
Okay, 30 seconds to Chantal, then I got to go.
And that's not going to happen for a number of months, probably between now and July 1st, but certainly not this month. I think that the Liberals need to think long and hard about the combination of the leadership campaign and this event, in the sense that I watched the Finance Minister, Dominique Leblanc, say, I'm not running. I think they would do well for themselves if ministers in critical positions decided not to run on that basis. Because Canadians need to know that they are taking care of business. And the worst signal to send is we're all going to go chase butterflies in the leadership campaign while this is happening.
At issue, the Liberal leadership race, with potential candidates becoming more clear. Other contenders are waiting to see how things unfold.
People want to see, obviously, what the rules are, including how much money needs to be raised.
While others have already bowed out.
I will be solely focused on the real economic threat that American tariffs represent.
What can we expect from the Liberal leadership race? Will the rules narrow the field? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Althea, we didn't get a chance to talk to you on Monday, unfortunately, so I'll go to you first just to get a sense of where you think the race is going, and given that we're dealing with very short timelines here in the end, probably.
Well, the main candidates seem to be Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, with Christy Clark, the former BC Premier, as a dark horse. There is a lot of apprehension about both Carney and Freeland within the Liberal caucus, but I think caucus endorsements are a lot less important than they would have been if this was a very long race where MPs who don't actually have their own organizational network or fundraising network could develop it in time to bring in new supporters for a candidate. Then there's like this whole bunch of would-be potential like C-list candidates who are making their names or floating their names. And there is some concern within the party, as there always is, I should add, that they will be swamped with people who are not like true liberals, that there will be either like this whole group of ethnic voters that will be mobilized. But this has always been the case. And then you have MPs sitting on the fence, like Anita Anand and François-Philippe Champagne and Mélanie Joly, and maybe for good reasons, as Chantal had pointed out, that their cabinet portfolios are such that they don't want to be seen to jeopardize that relationship or their work. But I also think what's really going on in the minds of a lot of Liberals is this the leader that you're going to pick, not just for this election, but for the next election? Or is this the leader that's going to take the fall? The party will get rid of that leader, and then there will be a proper leadership race, a chance to rebuild, and then you move forward with another leader for 1 or 2 terms.
Yeah.
A lot of Liberals keep saying that, the party only gives leaders one chance, but that's not actually true. And I think that changes the calculation, but both for the leadership candidates and for people who would support them.
Okay, Chantal?
As someone who covered the last one who got a second chance, called John Turner, I spent a number of years watching how many knives the Liberals could drive into his back before he finally quit. So good luck to whoever wants to attempt it. It was not a pleasant spectacle. That being said, the Liberals are going to have to decide. If they want to go in the next election and try to be competitive, then they need to accept that the ballot box issue is going to be who can best manage Donald Trump.
Yeah.
If they think that they're going to lose the next election in any event, then they can go to all these people who may be able to rebuild over the next decade the party. But it's one or the other. And not all candidates suit bold profile. No candidate. So there is a decision to be made here. I also believe that Dominique Leblanc threw a wrench into François-Philippe Champagne and Mélanie Joly's rationale for running by saying, I'm staying because the emergency here requires my full attention. The first question, if they run, is going to be, how in the world are you going to justify leaving the battlefield to go fight this rather minor battle of the leadership?
That I hadn't thought of that. That's pretty interesting. Andrew?
The first question that comes to a lot of people's minds is, why would you want to run in the face of the presumed oblivion the party's facing in this election? And there's a couple of reasons. One is, if you are the winner out of the blocks, fortune favors the brave. In politics, if you have the initiative, maybe it doesn't work out for you, but more often than not, having the initiative beats waiting for the better opportunity. The person who goes first, more often than not, will do better. Secondly, expectations are so low for them that if you can do anything better than that, if you stave off utter disaster, you're going to look pretty good. So there's a reason why people might want to be running this time rather than waiting. The problem they've got for the party is, you look at the recognition numbers on these people who've been cabinet ministers for several years. Abacus, I think it was, did this survey on this, and it's just dismal. The prime minister's at 98%. I think the next one is Freeland at 17, something like that, maybe 20% in terms of recognition. This is after you show them photos. And then it drops off below that. Carney is sort of in there as well because he used to be a governor. So that's a problem for them. And then lastly, you know, to be close to or seen to be close to the Prime Minister is not going to be a real advantage in this. Pretty clearly, if the party is trying to save the furniture, they're going to want somebody who's not terribly close to them. Freeland, I guess, got a bit of a leg up on that by the explosive way in which she parted company with him, but she's not loved within the party. She's not viewed as being a great communicator. I do think there's going to be a kind of a primary amongst the current cabinet ministers to see who ultimately faces off against Carney. I think that's when it's going to come down to.
Yeah. Chantal, you wanted in there?
I spent time once in a while over the past few years with Chrystia Freeland in Montreal, and I can testify that we were not noticed, or at least she was. I'm just saying there are too many pictures of Chrystia Freeland standing next to Justin Trudeau for her to, just on the basis of that resignation letter, have built a lot of distance from him, frankly.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I'm curious to see, because I believe by next week we should have a good sense of the lay of the land.
Yeah. I'm betting you were noticed, Chantal. I'm just going to put that out there. Last word to you, Althea. Last word to you.
I was going to say, I think the Prime Minister also threw like a wrench in Ms. Freeland's plans this week when he said in his press conference that he and Chrystia Freeland had been tied at the hip basically for the past 9 years. Yeah. I'm sure she was not happy to have him say that.
You may see that clip repeated.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The question of who can best represent change is an active one for a lot of Liberals. But I also think something worth noting and worth like a flagging going in is what and how will the party leadership position themselves on carbon pricing? I think we're going to see a lot of reversal on this front, a lot of asterisks and some messaging that perhaps we wouldn't expect from Liberals during this leadership race on something that has been the flagship policy of this government.
At issue, election interference. With an unexpected leadership race on the horizon, concerns around interference are growing.
The membership and how the membership would be dealt with, the timing associated with it, the threshold in terms of money that would need to be raised as an entry fee, all of those things were on the table.
So what needs to be done here to protect leadership contestants and the contest itself from foreign interference? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. This is a real concern because of this supporter category within the Liberal Party, Chantal, and we know that previous leadership races with other parties have had a certain level of foreign interference. We know nomination processes have had that problem. So is there a way to make sure that the Liberal Party can protect itself from outside influences here?
Okay, it's a lot harder to pack leadership, a national leadership campaign than it is to pack nomination meetings. The two bear no relationship whatsoever. Second, yes, the Liberal rules are really loose in the sense that just about anyone can register, but you do need to do so 41 days before the vote. So if you are trying to do that to the Liberals, you need to be doing it now. Because it's hard to see how they could stretch that beyond 45 or 48 days. And you need 41 days to have a right to vote. And then the other thing that people forget is that these leadership campaigns, this one, like the Conservatives, every riding is worth the same number of votes. What I'm basically saying is if you're going to organize, you need to be really sturdy, because Nunavut and Mississauga South are worth the exact same number of points. And I'm not too sure that there are organizations in this country that have both the muscle to organize at that level and the time. We're talking about a week here to sign up people to have a major influence on the outcome.
Well, certainly when you talk to people in the party, Andrew, they believe that the short period of time of the leadership race in some ways protects them a little bit from some of the things we're talking about here.
I think it cuts both ways. So Chantal's right. You know, the 41-day thing, you know, in a 6-month race is a lot looser than in a 2-month race. But also the level of desperation and franticness and cutting of corners, it seems to me, will also amp up if it's a closely fought race. And so everyone talks about, we've got all these safeguards. Well, we've seen what the safeguards were worth in the past. We have a uniquely lax system in Canada. I mean, all of the parties, the Liberals have the loosest system, quite apart from even the supporter category. You don't even have to be a permanent resident to vote in the Liberal race. You don't have to be an adult. You don't have to be a Canadian citizen. These are common sense things, surely, that the people who participate in choosing the leader should also be eligible to vote in Canadian elections. And yet we don't even enforce that. The 41-day rule, you know, in most countries, I've actually looked at this recently, most comparable G7 countries, it's 6 months to a year that you have to have been a member of the party before you can vote in either nomination races or leadership races. So there's a lot of tightening up that needs to be done. The Foreign Interference Commission's report on this was quite alarming. None of the parties has shown any sign of being willing to clean up their act on this, and I do think it starts to raise the question of whether it should in fact be legislated. Of course, the catch-22 is, to legislate, you have to get some of the parties to actually agree to it. But at some point, we're going to have some kind of massive scandal that will make it unavoidable.
Well, and it is all the more important this time because it's not just the leader of a party. It's the prime minister, for whether it be for 2 minutes or 2 weeks. Last word to you, Althea.
Okay, well, I disagree with Andrew. I don't think there's a problem with having 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds vote in a leadership race. In fact, I think it's a great thing to get them engaged in politics and hopefully get them voting in the future. I do think that there is a problem with the way the rules in the Liberal Party's constitution are currently written. I know a lot of Liberal MPs have mentioned this, even mentioned it at the caucus meeting this week. It should, at the very least, be restricted to permanent residents or Canadian citizens, if the party is willing to go there. This idea that you can just have an address in Canada and vote, that doesn't make sense to me. Whether or not you need paid membership or not paid memberships, I don't think that that's necessarily a deal breaker because, you know, these rules can always be, somebody will go and pay for somebody to sign up. So as we have seen in the Conservative leadership race, for example. So there's always concerns. I think what you want is to make sure that the people who are voting are legitimately engaged and living here, or Canadians who have a connection to the country, who want to be able to pick who the next prime minister could be, who the next Liberal leader could be, and they're not just swaying in the race and coming out of the race. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I got to leave it there too. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Good to see you again this week, and that is At Issue for this week. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks so much for watching.